coast as well. More showers packing into western Scotland and into Northern Ireland, but also some sunny spells around. And by then, we're all into the milder feeling air. Temperatures peaking between 9 and 15 degrees Celsius on Sunday afternoon. But it's staying stormy towards the north as we head into Monday. This is still Storm Bert, this area of low pressure. Tight squeeze on the ice bars in the north, lightening winds though further south, and there will be some sunshine on offer into the start of next week. Bye-bye for now.
Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you're watching The Context on BBC News.
Putin also claimed again that this missile is invincible and that the Western forces do not have any ways and means to intercept it.
I believe that he launched this a kind of game who's gonna blink the first one. So he wants to outwit, to outman and to outgun and to scare the West.
There is a lot of rhetoric here. Russia has escalated its nuclear threats. It has always done that when Putin felt that he was or has been feeling that he is under threat.
I think Russia has now supplied North Korea with, as you say, over 1 million barrels of oil, which is in violation of UN sanctions.
And joining me tonight are Leon Emirali, who was an aide to the former UK Environment Secretary Steve Barclay, and also Democratic strategist Kurt Bardella. First, the latest headlines for you. And the judge in Donald Trump's criminal hush money case has ordered that sentencing be delayed indefinitely following Mr. Trump's re-election. He was due to be sentenced next Tuesday. Mr. Trump's lawyers argued the case would cause unconstitutional impediments to his ability to govern. The rapper and music producer Sean Diddy Combs is appearing in court in New York to make a new request for bail. He's awaiting trial on sex trafficking and racketeering charges, which he denies. Combs has been detained at a New York jail for more than 2 months. A woman who accused the Irish mixed martial arts fighter Conor McGregor of raping her in a Dublin hotel 6 years ago has won her claim against him for damages in a High Court civil case. The MMA fighter has been ordered to pay Nikita Hand €250,000 in damages. Lava continues to flow from a volcano on Iceland's Reykjanes Peninsula. It's erupting for the 7th time in less than a year. Prior to 2021, the area hadn't seen volcanic activity in 800 years. Seismologists say a long dormant fault line lying under the landscape has reawakened. We begin this hour in Europe and a renewed warning of a very real and serious risk of global conflict developing from Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. That warning came on Friday from one of Kyiv's top allies, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. The conflict, he added, was entering a decisive stage. Moscow's strike on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, which involved a new experimental ballistic missile with multiple warheads, has been widely condemned. NATO says it won't be deterred from its support for Ukraine, and next week there'll be an emergency NATO-Ukraine meeting in Brussels. Ukraine's foreign minister, meanwhile, says his country will be looking for concrete outcomes from that.
The recent massive terrorist missile attacks, shelling of Ukraine, the involvement of North Korean troops, and new threats demonstrate that only Russia is interested in continuing the war and expanding it. The world must respond decisively to Russia's threats, nuclear blackmail and the involvement of foreign military to its aggression.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia's use of the hypersonic intermediate-range missile is a clear and severe escalation which the world must respond to. The level of technology could pose a risk beyond Ukraine's borders. With a range of 3,000 miles, it's a weapon that would be capable of reaching targets across Europe. President Putin, meanwhile, threatened further retaliation over what the Kremlin called the reckless decision of America and Britain to let Ukraine fire their missiles into Russia. The Russian president said he has a stock of new missiles ready to use. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban said the West should take these warnings seriously.
I believe that in the next 2 months, we Europeans should not base our approach on the rules of Western, European-style communication policies, but rather on a wartime logic. We must proceed carefully, weighing every sentence and word according to the principles of common sense. Otherwise, we'll see what happens.
Well, let's talk now to our panel tonight, entrepreneur and formerly aide to the former UK Chief Secretary to the Treasury. That's Leon Emirali, and Democratic strategist Kurt Bardella. Leon and Kurt, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining me on The Context tonight. And beginning with Ukraine, well, we just heard that message from Viktor Orban, didn't we? Meanwhile, Germany's foreign minister, and let me just read you the quote, has said today that playing with fear is a recipe which Vladimir Putin used already. So, Kurt, how seriously should the West take these warnings from the Russian president?
I think we're going to have a steady dose of posturing between now and the time that President-elect Trump resumes power again in January. All of these signals right now are really meant to try to dissuade the current Biden administration from doing anything that could strengthen Ukraine's hand as we head into the final, really less than 60 days of the Biden administration's rule. It's been no secret that Trump has laid out a very different agenda for how he wants to deal with the war. He has made the promise that he will bring an end to the conflicts both in the Middle East as well as in Ukraine and Russia. So we'll see what that ends up looking like. But I just think you're going to see a lot of posturing right now. I don't think anybody has any question that ultimately it's not really in Vladimir Putin's best interest to do anything to escalate once Donald Trump becomes president, as that would certainly backlash against the person that he certainly is seen to have wanted to elevate to power in the United States. We'll see why that is when Trump takes power.
And Leon, with President Zelensky asking for a serious response, his foreign minister talking about a concrete response, what could that look like?
Well, I think it looks like much of the same, which is ultimately the use of those Western-supplied weapons, potentially hitting Russia within their own borders, as well as just being a defensive weapon set. And ultimately, what does that lead to? It leads to a further escalation that we're already seeing. And I think that Kurt's point about Donald Trump, and I think the world is waiting with bated breath as to what this deal is going to be that he puts between Russia and Ukraine, but there's no guarantees that either party are going to accept those proposals from the incoming US president. And we are going to see a prolonging of this conflict. And you've got the splits at the moment between NATO, between European NATO allies, and between the incoming US administration. And I think that plays into Vladimir Putin's hands as being able to sort of sow that division that means the war is going to continue rolling on. And I think it's a great shame for both countries involved.
And Kurt, do you think the use of this ballistic missile is as much a message for the incoming president, Donald Trump, as it is for the current American president and other NATO countries closer to Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I think Putin wants to try to project a show of strength, of force, of reminding Donald Trump exactly who he's dealing with once he assumes power. And really, if you're the Ukrainians, you have to understand there is a window that is rapidly closing on what the type of support you have had from the United States is going to look like. That's going to end. Republicans who have taken power have unilateral power coming up here in 2025 of the House as well as the Senate and the White House. They've made it very clear there is going to be no new money for Ukraine, that they will not fund another dollar, authorize another dollar of spending. So, the Ukrainians have between now and the moment that Donald Trump assumes the oath of office to try to make as much advancement as possible before those resources will dry up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how developments between now and then might, influence what Donald Trump does or doesn't do, depending on the situation when he returns to the White House. Well, this decisive moment in the conflict, as the Polish Prime Minister puts it, comes at a time of big shifts globally. We talked there about the impact of the incoming second Trump term. So how will other nations like the UK navigate it all? The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said this morning the war could end today if Putin stopped being aggressive. He also told the G20 summit in Rio this week that Russia's irresponsible, in his words, irresponsible rhetoric on nuclear weapons wouldn't affect UK support for Ukraine. And in Parliament yesterday, there was this pledge.
Russia could roll back their forces and end this war tomorrow. But until then, we will stand up for what we know is right, for Ukraine's security and for our own security. And we will back Ukraine with what is needed for as long as it's needed.
Let's talk now to Anand Menon, Professor of European Politics at King's College London and Director of the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Anand, good to see you on the programme. And that seems like a pretty clear-cut commitment from the UK to Ukraine, doesn't it? Could anything change that?
Well, as your two panelists said, the crucial thing is going to be to see what happens when Trump takes office. And if it really is the case that the US are willing to give no more assistance at all to Ukraine, then that poses a real challenge to European states as to whether they're willing and able to step into the breach, because that will require significant more money and significant more weapons coming from Europe to Ukraine. And I'm not convinced that Europeans are fully committed to that. Some are more than others. But we won't really know, I don't think, until they're confronted with that stark dilemma.
Yeah, and if the UK wants a good economic and security relationship with the US under the second Trump administration, that begs the question, though, what happens if the US takes a very different position on Ukraine, as you've mentioned, and European leaders find that difficult? Does the UK think, well, we have to go our own way, a different way from America on Ukraine, but actually we'd like to kind of be closer to America on economic matters? I mean, can those two things happen?
I mean, those two things could happen. I think the real problem that a Trump presidency poses for the United Kingdom is it puts us in the position of doing what we've never liked doing, which is choosing between Europe and America. So if, say, the Trump administration said to our government, we can make a deal whereby you are not subject to these 10 or 20% tariffs on imports that we're planning to levy on all exporters to the United States. In return, we want you to open your market to some of our agricultural products. And that causes problems for the Starmer government in two ways. One, I don't think there's great support amongst public opinion here for that kind of deal. And two, it would rule out a key plank of his reset with the European Union, which is a veterinary agreement. So there is the potential that a Trump administration, when it comes to the relationship between us, the Europeans, and the United States, imposes some really tricky choices on our government.
Yeah, and one of those potential choices could be a move closer to the EU, which politically may be trickier in terms of the optics for this Labour government. I mean, how likely do you think that option is?
Well, I think there are two things to be said. One is that our military and our intelligence services really, really value the special relationship with the United States. And I imagine they'll be arguing that that should be maintained regardless of the implications in a way for our economic ties with the European Union. So there are some people for whom that security relationship is absolutely top of the list of priorities. The other thing to be said, of course, is for all Keir Starmer's talk of a reset with the European Union, negotiations haven't started yet, and we don't really know how far those talks will go. What we do know, though, is there will be a greater sense of urgency, I suspect, now because of the challenge that Trump poses to all Europeans.
And how do you think other countries within the EU are looking at the UK now? And figuring out what its position will be, or are they too busy thinking about their own positions, frankly, to worry too much about that?
Well, I think you're right. I think we're not a priority for EU member states at the moment because they've got more than enough other problems to be thinking about. But I think insofar as they're thinking about us, they'll be watching carefully to see how we react to President Trump. They'll be seeing if we try and negotiate special deals for ourselves when it comes to things like tariffs. They'll be looking to see about if there is negotiations with the US on standards, and they will be calibrating how to deal with us partly as a function of what we do with regard to the US.
Anand, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Professor Anand Menon there from King's College London, also director of the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Well, let's bring in our panellists again. Leon Emirali, entrepreneur and formerly aide to the former UK Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and Democratic strategist Kurt Bardella. A really interesting conversation there with Anand Menon, Leon and Kurt. And I just wonder, Leon, first of all, what do you think the UK's priority will be, actually, as we have this new administration coming in, the new Trump administration? Is it going to be security or the economy in terms of that relationship with the US?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it has to be security, doesn't it? I think that it would be reckless of the government to choose anything other than that. And I think we are seeing that direction being adopted by Keir Starmer over the last few weeks. He does seem to be edging slightly closer towards the European Union as opposed to towards Donald Trump. But it is that difficult choice that Anand Menon mentioned there, that difficult choice that Starmer's going to be put under, which is, do you cozy up with Donald Trump and get those favourable economic conditions, or do you ultimately have to, as a bargaining chip of that, do you have to give away some of the security, some of the defence of Ukraine? It's a really difficult spot for the Prime Minister to be in, but I do think he is going to side on the security point, and I do think that's going to be one of the big priorities. But ultimately, the United Kingdom and the European Union allies in NATO is not enough to end this war favourably for Ukraine. I think without America's support, it's going to be very difficult for the UK and European NATO allies to have that level of influence.
And Kurt, if that security priority naturally leads the UK government towards the relationship, a closer relationship with the EU, what does that mean for the UK's relationship then with the US, especially on the economy and potential tariffs and so on?
Yeah, there are multiple priorities that they're going to kind of have to hold in their hand at the same time. Relationship with the EU, obviously the relationship with NATO. Donald Trump has made it no secret that he wants that relationship with NATO to change as far as the United States position is concerned. And so in this case, security and the economy are kind of linked as what this administration does, in the name of security will very much impact the economy. It is under the guise of security that they're talking about reinstating a lot of these tariffs with China, for instance, which will have major economic repercussions. What the administration's posture is when it comes to China and Taiwan will have tremendous global repercussions, especially given Taiwan's presence in the chip making industry. So, if I'm the Prime Minister, if I'm the royal family, you need to be talking to people who understand what makes President Trump tick, as well as the members of Congress that are now taking power. There are many bargaining chips that Europe has, that the UK has, that could approach and inform how they deal with Donald Trump differently than they did in 2016. You have to make the decision. Are you going to let the personality stuff turn you off, or are you going to more gravitate towards the economy and security and try to make the best of a difficult personality situation?
Kurt and Leon, more from you in just a moment. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now, the judge in Donald Trump's criminal hush money case has ordered that sentencing be delayed indefinitely. That's following Mr. Trump's re-election to the White House. In May, the president-elect was found guilty of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged sexual encounter with an adult film star. Mr. Trump had been scheduled to be sentenced next Tuesday. That's now been suspended. Lawyers for the president-elect say the conviction would interfere with his ability to govern. They argue it should be dismissed entirely. Meanwhile, we're getting new details on the president-elect's cabinet. Mr. Trump has nominated veteran prosecutor Pam Bondi as his new Attorney General. She's a longtime ally of Mr. Trump, who defended him during his first Senate impeachment trial. Announcing the pick on Truth Social, the president-elect said, "For too long, the partisan Department of Justice has been weaponized against me and other Republicans. Not anymore," he said. The previous nominee, Matt Gaetz, had been one of the president-elect's most controversial picks. He withdrew his name from consideration on Thursday, saying his nomination was becoming a distraction. Well, let's return now to Kurt and Leon. Kurt, I'll go to you first of all. I just want to get your reaction to that hush money case and whether actually there ever will be a sentencing, given that it's been put off indefinitely.
I don't think that there will be. And frankly, the idea that we're going to sentence the sitting president, who would be the sitting president at the time, to anything would create such a constitutional crisis, the likes of which that the founders and framers could not have possibly envisioned. This is, even though it may not be what's best for the letter of the law, it is what's best for the country. Because you can't have a situation where the President of the United States is sentenced to any type of jail time situation. That would be untenable and impossible. So this is the prosecutors and the judicial system just realizing the reality, which is Donald Trump's not going to spend a minute in prison, whether you think he's guilty or not. Sentencing at this point would do nothing but create an untenable fight between two branches of government that we just can't have.
Yeah, it would be something we've never seen before, I guess. But then the flip side of that, just before we get on to the picks, the flip side of that, Leon, is that no one should be above the law.
Yeah, and you can't expect the president to be jailed, I think is Kurt's point. I mean, it would be awful for the country, but there has to be a component of him being held account by the judiciary. There are issues with Donald Trump's legality, but he's been elected. He's been elected president, and there's immunity that comes with that. So it's all part of the wider system. But I do think that if these legal issues rumble on for Donald Trump, it is going to sow further division in America at a time when the country really needs to be united. So I don't think it will be good for the country if that was to happen.
Let's talk then about Pam Bondi, the new pick for Attorney General. There was a pretty positive reception from most Republicans to her nomination by the president-elect. Kurt, what do you think that's going to mean for the Justice Department? As I mentioned there in the introduction to this section, Donald Trump felt that he had been victimized by the Justice Department, didn't he?
Yeah, well, now he has someone who will do his bidding, who will look to turn the tables. If they feel that the Justice Department's been targeting Republicans unfairly and unduly, they will now try to do the same for Democrats. I will point out that the same Justice Department also successfully prosecuted the sitting president's son, Hunter Biden, as well as the Democrat mayor of New York City and the then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez. So for those who want to say that the Justice Department's been unfair, I would point to those three very high-profile examples of Democrats being prosecuted by the Biden Justice Department. But in Pam Bondi, he gets somebody who will do his bidding, who successfully defended him in his impeachment trial, so a loyalty factor that we know Trump values above all else. And unlike his previous nominee, this is someone who's certainly not going to be accused of having sex with a 17-year-old.
And Leon, it's going to be interesting now that the pressure from the Senate has forced Matt Gaetz to withdraw his nomination, whether they think, actually, if there are other picks that we're not sure about, we can get them out as well. That's going to be really interesting to watch how that plays out.
It is going to be fascinating, but in a way, maybe the Matt Gaetz appointment, or the appointment that wasn't, was a reason to deflect all of the heat towards him so that it would take some of the pressure off some of those more other controversial picks elsewhere in the cabinet, potentially. But I do think when the Matt Gaetz appointment was announced, you do look at it and think this can't happen, this can't work. I mean, someone in that position of Attorney General with probably the most blackmailable history that he's got. That person would have. You can't have someone in that position, and I think that Donald Trump has been able to deflect a lot of the heat on him and perhaps away from some of the other more controversial picks as well.
Do you think that's right, Kurt? Do you think Matt Gaetz was set up, for want of a better expression, as the lightning rod?
Yeah, I think Matt took one for the team. He knew with this pending report about to become public, he wasn't going to be in Congress much longer anyway. This was a way to orchestrate getting him out, taking the heat off of other nominees like RFK Jr., like Tulsi Gabbard, like Pete Hegseth, and draw a lot of attention. And all of a sudden, other picks that may not have gotten that kind of honeymoon, they look much more reasonable next to a Matt Gaetz.
So you think that could have been a strategy? I mean, of the others who are controversial, and you mentioned a couple of names there, do you think they'll all get through now, or will the Senate exert some independence given the scale of the Trump victory?
I think that there are, when it comes to the remaining members have been announced at least, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, there are a lot of questions from traditionally more hawkish Republicans about her national security credentials. And then Pete Hegseth also has some scandals that he's going to have to answer for. There is an allegation of a sexual assault that occurred in California that more details have been coming out. And certainly when it comes to some of the Republicans in office who have oftentimes talked about the importance of having qualified people, especially in military, DOD, national security positions at a time where there's global conflict in the Middle East, in Russia. This is going to be an important, for the entire global community, role. The weekend anchor of a cable news show doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence when it comes to the military.
Kurt and Leon will be talking some more in just a moment. Right now, a short break. Stay with us here on The Context on BBC News.
Hello there, good evening. Well, it's all changed weather-wise this weekend to something milder, but a lot more stormy. Now, today was a quiet day of weather, still very cold, icy, some snow underfoot, but some blue sky and some sunshine too. But there will be some severe weather through the weekend from Storm Bert. Widespread gales towards coastal areas, severe gales, heavy rain, and as the heavy rain bumps into the colder air, it's likely to turn to snow. There'll be drifting snow over the